What's up everyone, it's G, and if you're like me and others growing up in the early 2000s, you remember a certain TV show that will wake you up at 3 a.m. with familiar sounds of that one song called Low Rider. No, not Flow Rider. And I'm talking about the George Lopez Show. For those who don't know, the George Lopez Show was an American television sitcom that aired in ABC from 2002 to 2007. The show was created by George Lopez himself and started George Lopez as a Mexican-American man who worked in Los Angeles airplane parts factory. And during the time the show had, you'd be surprised when I tell you it had a crossover episode. But the way the episode was written, I honestly didn't know at the time that this was a crossover, probably because I didn't know anything about the other show when I was younger. What show I'm talking about? I'm talking about the hit TV show Freddy. Wait, you're telling me you don't remember the show Freddy? Well, I don't blame you. The Freddy show only had one season, but it started with Freddie Prinze Jr. The Freddy show followed Freddy, a successful young chef. Freddy owns his own Italian restaurant in Chicago and generously shares his luxurious apartment with his niece, sister-in-law, and grandmother. They all often abuse him for his good nature, financially and otherwise, without showing him the respect and gratitude he deserves. This show must have been popular because towards the end of the first season, Freddy managed to get not one, but two crossover episodes with George Lopez. But let's talk about how this went down. The episode starts off with George and his wife Angie coming home only to find their son Max on the computer expecting the worst. They storm in only to find him talking to someone named Z-Girl. Max tries to explain that the girl's name is Zoe. He met her in the chat room. And boy, remember those? Being concerned, Max shows them what Zoe looks like, but they don't believe him, which is very reasonable. Like honestly, I don't even trust women's pictures when I see them on dating apps, so you can only imagine what it was like back in the early 2000s chat rooms. So trying to prove Max wrong, George hops into Max's chat room, and that's where we get a cut of Chicago. Well, Freddy and Chris notices a message sent by George asking what she's wearing. Being creeped out, Freddy hops onto the chat room after threatening to put hands on Zoe.
Uncle Freddy,
I'ma beat you.
George and Freddy starts to cyber chat with each other, talking like there were some grown men acting like teens. Jumping to the conclusion they both want to try to catch the other, like they're Chris Handsome.
You want to explain to me what you're doing here?
George and Angie tries to call the police, but to find out that the cops can't help, they then put a child lock on the computer. Max being upset. As he tries again to explain that Zoe is a girl his age, Max tries to use Carmen's phone to chat with Zoe. They both explain what's going on, and Zoe says that Freddy is going to LA, but George finds Max on the phone and grounds him. But Max says that he's gonna find a way to talk to Zoe and storms off. We cut back to Freddy, and he's upset that Zoe is still online, turning down the idea of her going with him to LA. Both decide to meet up and setting up a sting operation to prove the other that they're creeps. The next day, George sends Freddy an address to meet up, that being Ernie's place, George's best friend. Before going, Angie baits Ernie to snitch on them and is upset with George's wacky shenanigans. Couldn't get through with him, George is ready to catch Freddy, and this is where the crossover finally starts, ladies and gentlemen. Even though we have the last 3 minutes of the episode, does George and Freddy kill each other? Well, we're gonna find that out after this. So while Freddy and Chris storms in Ernie's apartment like it was D-Day, this is where both parties' misunderstandings happen. While trying to choke out one another, they both realize that Max and Zoe are real and were just teens talking to each other and quickly squash it. At the end, George tells Max what happens and they're going to Chicago so him and Zoe can finally meet. And that's the George Lopez cross Freddy crossover. What do you think? Well, it was pretty good crossover for what it was. There was a setup in the episode and why these characters actually meet. Not a lot of crossovers do that other than convenience, but you don't really see an actual crossover until the end of the episode, where we get like 4 minutes of dialogue. Wish we could have seen more interaction with both shows, especially having Max and Zoe meet. You know, the whole point of the crossover. Wait, there was a part 2? Okay, so I didn't notice, but the George Lopez episode is not the main crossover episode. It's more of a setup to the actual crossover episode and where the second part of this crossover is. We'll have to go into the Freddy show. To give a quick summary on this part, George, Max, and Ernie goes to Chicago, and as quickly as Max and Zoe meet, they break up. Most of the episode has to do with George and Freddy trying to prove to the other who's still tough, leading them to a bar in Freddy's old neighborhood and getting into a fight, landing them in jail. They both apologize and take a funny photo, and that's the episode. Was the second part better than the first? Not really. To be fair, I've never watched the Freddy show, so this being my first time watching it was kind of hard to get into. Like the whole dynamic of the show and talking about actual episodes, it steered away from the reason why the crossover happened. Like I said, as soon as Max and Zoe met, the next scene, they break up. Other than that, it was funny to see how Ernie and Chris interacted. Chris being the playboy and Ernie being Ernie, and even having Chris giving Ernie some advice about his problem with women. But that's gonna be it for the video, guys. I think this was an interesting crossover. Like I said, when I first saw this, I didn't know this was a crossover, but I do remember this episode being played a lot. But tell me, what do you think about the episode? Are you a fan of both shows? And other than that, don't forget to leave a like and tell me what crossover show was your favorite. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Until the next one, peace.
You win.